Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind was sharp off the foothills when Weston Jameson saw the girl he had not laid eyes on in 7 years, and the knife glinting near her ribs. He had not meant to be in town that long. Just enough time to pick up the supplies, send a wire to Cheyenne, and be gone before the sun dipped too low. But fate had long fingers, and they dragged him straight into the middle of the alley behind Baird's Mercantile. There she was, Willa Jennings, pressed against the wall, her dark green dress torn at the sleeve, fists clenched, and eyes locked on the man in front of her. The bastard held a blade, not waving it, not threatening, just holding it low, steady, with the hunger of a man who had cornered something he thought no one would miss. It took Weston 1 second to take it in. 1 second to shake off the ghost of the last time he saw her barefoot by the creek, her hair in a braid, laughing as he swore he would come back for her. He threw his gun. The revolver clattered to the ground behind the man just as Weston lunged. His boots pounded the dirt. His shoulder slammed into the bastard's ribs. They hit the ground hard, Weston's fists driving into the man's jaw again and again, until the knife skittered out of reach. "I got you now," he growled, blood running down his knuckles. The man scrambled off, lips split and teeth loose, and bolted without so much as a backward glance. Willa was still pressed to the wall, breathing hard, her hands trembling. Weston stood, chest heaving, and looked at her like a man trying to piece together a dream he never thought he would see again. "You all right?" She nodded once, then stepped forward and threw her arms around him. She was shaking. He wrapped his arms around her waist and held her, grounding her with the warmth of his body and the steadiness of his breath. "You came back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said. She pulled back slowly, her brown eyes searching his face. "It has been 7 years, I know. I thought you were dead. I almost was, twice." They stood there for a moment, time folding around them like the wind curling through the alley. Then she stepped back, brushing her hair out of her face. "Come on," she said. "My place is just outside town. I need to check on my boy anyway." Weston blinked. "You have a son," she nodded. "His name's Jonah. He's 6. His father left when he was 2, never came back." Weston's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Just followed her as she led the way, steady and quiet, past the general store and the saloon, past the stairs and whispers, and down the dirt road that curved toward the hills. Her small house sat tucked between cottonwood trees, the porch swept clean, smoke curling from the chimney. A boy sat on the steps, whittling a stick. He looked up as they approached, then dropped the stick and ran to her. "Mama," she caught him up in her arms and kissed his cheek. "I'm fine, baby." He looked at Weston with wide eyes. "Who's that?" "This is a friend," she said. "His name is Weston." Weston crouched down. "Hey, Jonah, heard you like carving stuff." Jonah nodded slowly, then stuck out his hand. Weston shook it. Inside, the house smelled like stew and wood smoke. Weston sat at the table while Willa stirred the pot on the stove. Jonah sat beside him, showing him the toy horse he had carved all by himself. Later, after the boy had gone to bed curled up in a quilt, Willa poured 2 mugs of coffee and sat across from Weston by the fire. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I saw you. That was all it took." "Do you always throw your gun before a fight?" He smiled. "Only when it matters." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back?" "I rode into Cheyenne last month, heard your name mentioned by a rancher. Said you were raising a boy on your own out here. I left the next morning." Her fingers tightened around her mug. "I waited for a long time after you left. I never meant to be gone that long. I got pulled into a cattle drive that turned to hell, then a fever near Dodge. Then I got shot hauling a wagon through Apache territory. I kept telling myself I would get back to you, but each day turned into the next. Willa nodded. I stopped waiting after a while. Had to. I do not blame you. They sat in silence for a minute, the fire popping. I'm not the same girl you left, she said. Life's been hard. I would not expect you to be, he said. I am not the same man. She looked at him then. Really looked. His jaw was stronger, more lined. His hands were calloused, marked by years of work and blood and survival. But his eyes were the same, steady, kind, and they were looking at her like she was the only thing in the world. I never stopped loving you, Weston said, voice low. Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast and looked away. I do not know what to do with that. I am not asking you to promise anything. Just let me be around. Let me help. Willa stood and walked to the window, arms folded. The moonlight cut across her face and she looked tired, but also strong. I do not want Jonah getting attached unless you mean to stay. I understand. She turned back to him. Do you? Weston stood, crossed the room. He stopped in front of her and reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I do not want to be anywhere else. She looked up at him and something in her face softened. She reached out and took his hand. All right, she whispered. We will see, he nodded. That is all I ask. And for the first time in 7 years, Willa Jennings let herself hope again. The next morning, frost clung to the fence rails and the sun had barely crested the hills when Weston stepped outside with a bucket in one hand and the axe in the other. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, and inside, Willa was showing Jonah how to mend a tear in his shirt. Weston heard her voice through the wall low, even, with the steadiness of someone who had talked herself through loneliness more times than she could count. The woodpile out back was half gone, and the logs left were too thick for Willa's narrow hands. He made quick work of splitting them. The sound of the axe thudding into pine echoed across the yard. He stacked the pieces neatly, then poured the bucket of water into the horse trough, wiping his hands on his trousers as he turned toward the barn. Inside, the single draft horse was stamping softly, and the smell of hay and old leather filled the air. He found a cracked yoke hanging on the wall and ran his fingers along the split. She'd been holding this place together with little more than grit and threadbare luck. By the time he came back, Willa had a pan of cornbread cooling on the windowsill and the boy was outside, chasing a chicken with a stick and a shout. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I didn't ask you to start fixing things, she said. I know, he replied. She stepped aside as he climbed the porch. You plan to do that every morning, only if I'm staying, her brow lifted. You think that's settled? No, ma'am, just laying down my vote. She hesitated, then glanced toward the barn. I've been trading eggs for rides into town. That wagon yoke's been near falling apart since spring. I saw it. You know anything about harness repair? I do. Then I won't stop you. He nodded once and turned to go, but her voice caught him. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. He looked back. You didn't. That evening, Jonah fell asleep curled against a pillow on the floor while Weston read aloud from a worn Bible, his voice quiet, steady. Willa sat nearby, sewing a patch onto one of Jonah's trousers, her needle moving in even strokes. When the boy was carried off to bed, Weston stayed by the fire, hands spread toward the warmth. Willa returned with 2 mugs of steeped chamomile, setting one beside him. I meant to ask, she said, settling into the other chair. Where did you get that scar above your collarbone? He touched the edge of it without thinking. Comanche raid 3 years back, south of Santa Fe. We lost 5 men and all our beef. She didn't flinch, but her mouth pressed into a tight line. You always were too stubborn to be afraid. I was plenty afraid, just too proud to show it. You still proud, not like I was. The fire crackled between them. She sipped her tea, then set the cup down gently. I don't let many people pass that door, I figured. You're not just another man passing through. I hope not. She nodded slowly, then leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Jonah's never had someone who stayed, not really. He remembers his father, but only in pieces. Bits of a voice, a pair of boots. Sometimes I think that's worse than forgetting altogether. Weston didn't answer right away. He reached for the fire poker, nudging a log back into place. What would he need from me? Nothing you can give in a single day. I'm not in a hurry. She looked at him, searching for cracks in the words, but he held steady. Then you can stay, she said. For now. He gave a single nod. I'll bed down in the barn. You don't have to, I know. But I will. She didn't argue. He stood, taking his coat from the hook by the door. Weston, she said before he stepped outside. He turned. I'm not promising anything either. I wouldn't want you to. She watched him walk into the cold, the door closing soft behind him. In the barn, he laid his bedroll beside the hay, the boards creaking under his weight. Through the slats he could see the light in her window, warm and still. He lay back, hands folded behind his head, and listened to the wind settle over the land. It was not peace yet. But it was close enough to sleep. 2 weeks passed with the slow rhythm of early December, the days short and the wind sharp enough to bite. Each morning Weston rose before first light and worked until the ache in his shoulders dulled to something familiar. He repaired the wagon's yoke, mended a section of fencing that had bowed under the weight of last month's snow, and shored up the barn's western wall where the boards had begun to rot through. Willa never asked, but she left his coffee on the porch rail each morning, still warm. Jonah followed Weston like a shadow after his chores were done, asking questions about bridles and saddle knots, about the burn marks on Weston's fingers and the way he tied a pack mule's lead. Weston answered each question with the patience of a man who remembered what it felt like to want a voice to steady yours. Late one afternoon, Willa found Weston in the lean-to behind the barn, hammering new nails into a stall gate. I've been meaning to ask something, she said, not quite meeting his eye. He set the hammer down. Go ahead. That man, the one in the alley. She paused. Do you know who he was? Weston shook his head. Never seen him before. He was waiting. I could feel it. Like he knew I'd be alone. She folded her arms. I can't think of anyone local who'd want to hurt me, but there's folks who passed through here over the years. Did you tell the sheriff? No, I didn't see the point. He's got 2 deputies covering near 100 square miles. By the time they found the man, he'd be halfway to Colorado. Weston studied her a moment. You think he'll come back? She glanced toward the hills. I don't know. I can ride into town tomorrow, ask around quietly. Willa hesitated. If he was part of something larger. I'd rather not stir it unless we have to. I'll keep watch then. If you're worried, I can sleep inside near the door. She shook her head. Not yet. Fair enough. She stepped back and looked toward the barn. Jonah said you used to ride dispatch. I did. Out of Fort Lyon. You ever go north of the Yellowstone? Once. Winter run through Crow Country. Got caught in a blizzard so thick I couldn't see my hand. She let a smile touch her lips. You always did end up in the worst places. I went where I was needed. She looked at him then, really looked. What do you need now? The question hung between them, quiet and honest. He answered without blinking. Something solid, a place to stand still. Willa didn't reply. She turned and walked back toward the house, her shawl catching in the wind. That night, Jonah sat at the table carving a new shape from a block of pine while Weston ran his whetstone along the edge of a plow blade. Willa moved around the kitchen, her steps light but deliberate, as if the weight of something unseen had begun to lift. After Jonah was asleep, Weston lingered by the hearth, rolling his sleeves back down. Willa sat across from him, folding a piece of cloth into neat squares. I can't decide if you're patient or just stubborn, she said. maybe both. I've seen men try to force their way in. You haven't. I don't want to take anything not freely given." She looked down. "I never thought I'd have to choose again." After Jonah's father left, I made peace with being alone. Not bitter, just quiet. "I'm not asking you to stop being quiet." Willa met his gaze. "I don't know how to trust someone all the way anymore." "You don't have to, just trust me tomorrow." Then the next. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Her fingers were rough from work but warm. She didn't pull away. "Tomorrow, then," she said. Weston turned his hand and held hers gently, the lamp casting their shadows long against the wall. Outside, the wind had settled, and the night was still. By the third week, the snow came down steady and clean, blanketing the land in silence. Weston had just returned from a ride east, where he'd traded a pair of cured rabbit skins for lamp oil and a sack of winter apples. He found Willa standing behind the house, sleeves rolled, apron damp, hanging wet linens on the clothesline that sagged between two posts. Her breath curled in the cold air, and she didn't hear him until he was close enough to set the sack on the porch rail. "You ride all the way past Mill Creek?" she asked, tying off the last corner of a sheet. "Near enough. Saw a fox crossing your southern fence. Looked too thin. You might want to keep Jonah's boots inside from now on." She looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "He doesn't like the smell of leather in the house. Says it makes the kitchen taste like saddle soap." Weston gave a quiet grunt of amusement and leaned against the post, watching her fold the wet sleeves over the line. "You ever think of moving closer to town?" "I did once. When Jonah was still small, but I couldn't bring myself to trade these trees for dust and noise." She paused. "I planted those when I lost my mother, the cottonwoods. They're the only thing I've ever seen grow from grief." He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I lost my brother near the Cimarron, didn't mark the grave, couldn't find a stone that would hold." Her hand stilled against the linen. "You never mentioned family." "There's not much left of it." He looked out toward the ridge. "But I remember the way he laughed." "That stayed." Willa nodded, and the silence between them felt less like absence and more like understanding. Inside, Jonah was brushing the mare's coat with a curry comb Weston had restrapped using old harness leather. The boy's brow furrowed in concentration, his tone serious as he explained to the horse how snow made the world quieter, but not safer. That evening, Weston sat at the table sharpening a drawknife. The room glowed gold with lamplight, and Willa was sewing a narrow hem along the bottom of a new curtain she'd pieced together from flour sacks. She hadn't asked him to stay for supper, but she'd set a third plate on the table without a word. "You ever think about teaching?" Weston asked, watching her fingers move. She didn't look up. "Teaching what? Anything. You're careful with your hands. You explain things clear." "I used to help the preacher's wife with her girls. But after I had Jonah, I didn't want to be away from him all day." She set the fabric down. "Besides, the schoolhouse only pays in dried beans and worn-out shoes." He nodded, then leaned back slightly. "I've seen worse trades." She watched him a moment. "What would you do if you weren't riding or fixing things?" He rested the drawknife on the table. "Maybe build something from the ground up. A cabin. A place that didn't need mending every time the wind shifted." Her eyes softened. "You think about that often, more lately?" The fire cracked and the room settled around the sound. She reached for her tea, then hesitated. "Jonah asked if you were going to be here for Christmas." Weston looked at her. "What did you say?" "I told him I hadn't asked you yet." He folded his arms across his chest. "Then I guess you should." Her lips tilted just slightly. "Will you stay?" He nodded once. "I will." She looked down at her tea then, and her voice changed lower, steadier. "I never thought I'd let someone back in like this. Not past the door, not into the quiet." He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Her fingers circled the rim of the cup. "But I want to try." Weston stood then slowly and crossed to where she sat. He didn't rush it. He bent just enough to be level with her eyes and reached out, brushing his knuckles gently along her jaw. "I've been waiting for you to say that." She looked up, eyes brimming with something bright and unsaid. Then, gently, she placed her hand over his. "I know." They stood in the warm hush of the room, their breath slow, steady, as the wind pressed soft against the windows. Snow fell outside, but inside the house, something had settled, something lasting. The morning air smelled of cedar and iron as Weston secured the last of the new hinges to the barn door. The wood had dried well, and he tested the swing twice before stepping back. His gloves were stiff with cold, but the work had gone smooth. Behind him, the sound of Jonah's laughter carried from the back of the house. Willa was showing him how to stamp molasses cookies with the bottom of a glass jar. Weston could hear the weight of winter in the stillness, but inside those walls, the world felt warmer than any fire he'd ever built. By midday, the wind shifted, and a rider came up from the road, a man in a dark wool coat, his horse lathered and his hat pulled low. Weston caught the glint of a badge pinned to the man's chest as he slowed. "Looking for a Weston Jameson," the rider said, voice even. Weston stepped forward. "That's me." The man dismounted and offered a gloved hand. "Deputy Marshal Harris, out of Rawlins. I've been following a trail since early November. Heard about a knife-carrying drifter stirring trouble in these parts." "Willa Jennings mentioned a man who came at her in town," Weston said. The deputy nodded. "That might be him. He's robbed 3 farms south of here. Same pattern, comes late, takes what's easy, leaves fast. Mean streak, but not clever. I'm warning folks up this way in case he circles back." Willa had come to the porch by then, wiping her hands on a cloth. She didn't speak, but her eyes met Weston's with quiet understanding. "He hasn't come near the house," Weston said, "but if he does, he won't get far." The deputy tipped his hat. "I'll check back in a few days. Meantime, keep a lamp burning at night." "He's scared of light." When the rider was gone, Willa came up beside Weston. "I'll put the lanterns near the windows," she said. "You'll be sleeping inside now." He didn't argue. That night, after Jonah had gone to bed with his new wooden whistle tucked under his pillow, Willa sat beside Weston in the sitting room, her hands resting in her lap. The lamplight caught the edge of her cheekbone and the curve of her shoulder, and she looked over at him with something quiet but certain behind her gaze. "You ever think about marriage?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "I have." "You ever come close?" "Twice. One died in Kansas of a fever. The other changed her mind before the banns were read." He waited, but she didn't ask more. Instead, she leaned back, her voice low. "I haven't thought of it in years. Not since I had to sell my mother's ring just to buy Jonah winter boots." He reached into his coat and pulled free a small pouch. She looked at it, puzzled. "I traded a rifle for this in Cheyenne," he said. "Didn't know if I'd find you, didn't know if I'd be welcome, but I carried it anyway." She opened the pouch slowly. Inside was a plain gold ring, old but well kept, the band thin and strong. "I don't have much," he said. "But I can build. I can keep us warm and fed, and I love you more than I thought a man like me was allowed." She stared at the ring a long time. Then she stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him on the hearth's edge. "You're not just offering me a life, you're offering Jonah one too." "I am." She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Then yes." He leaned forward and kissed her, slow and sure, his hand cupping her cheek. She didn't pull away. She pressed her palm to his chest and breathed deep, like she was letting something go. That night, he didn't sleep in the barn. Christmas came with a heavy snow and a sky the color of bone. Willa cooked a roast in the hearth, and Jonah opened a new pair of boots Weston had bartered for with a stack of fox pelts. They sat by the fire after supper, Jonah playing with a carved wagon, Weston's arm around Willa's shoulders. No fear lingered in the corners of the room. No shadows waited at the windows. By New Year's, Weston had filed a marriage license in town. The preacher married them under the cottonwoods, the branches hung with ribbon and pine cones, Willa in her mother's shawl and Weston in his cleanest shirt. Jonah stood beside them, holding tight to his mother's hand. Spring thawed the earth slow and deep. Weston built a second room off the back of the house, and Willa planted beans and turnips in neat rows along the south fence. Jonah helped drive nails and learned to ride bareback, and the house filled with the scent of fresh bread and sawdust. They never saw the drifter again. Years passed. Weston's hair grayed at the temples, and Willa's laugh came easier than it ever had. Jonah grew tall and quiet like Weston, with Willa's eyes and her steady hand. He built his own barn behind the house one summer and married the girl from the mill town 2 valleys over. They had 3 daughters, and Willa taught them to sew while Weston carved them toys from pine. On summer evenings, Weston and Willa sat on the porch, hands clasped, watching the cottonwoods sway with the wind. "I never thought peace would look like this," she said one evening. "It looks like you," he replied. And it did.